the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. We're talking about one of my favorite things tonight. We're talking about movies. What is your favorite movie of the year? What movie do you want to see over the holidays? And what do you think is the most influential movie of the year? The Oscars are coming up, Golden Globes just came out. So it's coming up on Christmas. You know, what movie might you want to go see? We're happy to have with us film critic for the Nashville Scene, Jason Shawhan. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
Thank you again. All right, so what's coming out this weekend, next weekend, over the holidays? We'll get into some of the more, important movies, but what's kind of happening in the next couple of weeks?
Okay, there's 3 things coming out this weekend. There's an animated film called Ferdinand for the kids. There's a beautiful adult horror fairy tale film called The Shape of Water for adults and weirdos. I consider myself part of that. That's opening at the Billcourt. And then a little film called Star Wars The Last Jedi that's opening everywhere else.
Star Wars, okay. Yeah. And what are people saying about that?
Well, I saw it last night, and it's...
Oh, cool.
About 10 minutes into it, I had this realization where I was like, oh, I have to evaluate this like a real movie. Like, it's not just about the Star Wars experience. It delivers that, but it is very much a real movie. Like, it's doing different things. It's expanding the universe. It is a lot of the criticisms of The Force Awakens 2 years ago was that it was basically just sort of a remix of Episode 4, A New Hope, that it was just taking those elements and, slightly changing them around a little bit and serving it up again. And this is the exact opposite of that.
And it's getting, I go on Rotten Tomatoes, it got huge numbers so far. I guess a lot of critics have seen it. Obviously, it hadn't really opened yet.
Right.
But are critics generally liking it?
I can only judge from the group that I saw it with, but yeah. I mean, it wasn't just like the usual, like the fanboy division or sci-fi genre folks. It was across the board. People were like, this is something interesting and different, and good for that.
And as we talk about, we're going to talk all about these movies. You brought trailers and everything. I just brought up Rotten Tomatoes. I know there's been some talk. Is Rotten Tomatoes responsible for fewer people going to the movies? That some of the movies are upset at some of the ratings they get on there. What are your thoughts on all that?
Okay. The problem with the idea that Rotten Tomatoes is somehow, it's basically, there's this weird schizophrenic studio mentality. And sometimes it's, critics have too much power and they're like holding back these films and shame on them. And other times they're like, who cares what critics have to say? I mean, it's like basically whatever interpretation of that suits their bottom line is what they go with. But I mean, it's like the idea that if Rotten Tomatoes was single-handedly stopping people from going to see things, like the studios would just cut critics off completely. I mean, it's just math. It's like you just have to go out and do the reading and do the math. I mean, it's a useful thing for people who want to reduce everything down to a number. And I always fought back during my years at the Tennessean, I fought with the idea of the star rating. I mean, it's just it's a great simple signifier for somebody who wants to take half a second to rank a film that they are considering seeing. I always thought you should just choose 5 words to describe it and use that, and then you have to decide, well, are those good words or bad words? And then you have to sort of you have to do a little work for it.
Right.
I mean, it just depends on who your editor is at the time.
Right. No, that's interesting. And Rotten Tomatoes, well, the whole film critic universe has shifted so much.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it used to be, Siskel and Ebert, they had all the power in the world. Now we don't have that, but you have this kind of amalgam of critics that are part of this Rotten Tomato sort of number.
Well, I mean, there's the whole concept of that the internet makes everybody a critic. Everyone's got equal access, well, until net neutrality goes away. Not that I'm terrified of that, but I am. It will affect every single one of us. But the thing about that I find interesting is that there's always hierarchies. There's always somebody who's a more important critic than you versus somebody who's just blogging on the internet, and it's fine. It's just as long as you are able to put your voice out there, somebody's going to read it. Somebody's going to let that become part of their decision-making process, either by embracing it or rejecting it. And I'm fine with that too. Like, I'm fine with people who read my stuff because they're looking for something interesting, and I'm fine for people who read it to know what to do the opposite of. You know, I get whatever sort of cosmic credit you get when somebody clicks on a thing you wrote. I get it either way. So
right.
And I'm okay with that. But it's weird. It is because who decides who is a valid voice anymore? You know, there used to be some consistency. If you were in print, you were a valid critic. And like now, I mean, like when the Village Voice stops publishing print edition, you know, when the LA Weekly gets torn asunder by mysterious right-wing overlords who've bought it overnight and fired everybody. I mean, it's like, who determines what's a valid voice now? So you just have to like write whatever you can and hope that people recognize your name. So I mean, it's just like it's sort of like at the zoo, you know, during feeding time when they just sort of like toss it out there and like everybody goes nuts for it. It's like that, only it's for legitimacy as a critic.
What do you think about this year? We're coming toward the end, award season coming up. What do you think about this year's movies overall?
I think it's a fascinating bunch of films. Like, there's no dominant narrative. Things that would in past years be considered like slam dunks. You know, everything's in disarray just because award season used to be the domain of Harvey Weinstein. Like, he redefined how the game was done in terms of like getting screeners out there, organizing screenings for such. And like now everyone's just sort of like, what? Huh? So it's like the films have sort of been able to step up and speak for themselves in a way that they weren't necessarily able to before. It used to be publicists and strategies controlled the dialogue this time of year. But now if you look at all the like various critics groups that have come together and done their awards and stuff, there's nothing even close to a consensus, and that's really exciting.
So even at this point, you would say there's nothing close to really a consensus. We don't know what.
I mean, there's a lot of films that people like. There's a lot of films that people are saying like, oh, well, this has got awards bait written all over it.
Right.
But, you know, nothing's definite. There's nothing that's winning everything. There's no hypothesis has been confirmed by what all data we've received so far. And that's really interesting.
Then bigger picture even, how has the year been financially for Hollywood?
They're fine. It's not as big as it was last year, but they're doing just as well. You know, like a lot of films made a whole lot of money, a lot of films lost a lot of money, and a lot of films in the middle shook out somewhere along that continuum. I mean, it's, you know, there are some companies like Broad Green's no longer with us, basically. Like, they put their last film out this past weekend and it's just not doing anything. And it's, you know, it's sad to have any studio like that's been trying to do different stuff fall by the wayside. But, you know, I mean, it's just like Warner made $2 billion this year.
So they're making money.
Just because of it and Wonder Woman and even Justice League, which hasn't been performing to the level they'd hoped, but it's still out there and, like, you know, driving international box office. So it's like, I mean, don't cry for any of the studios at this point. And you have, like, some who'll step up and do, like, crazy things, like with Sony, with when Ridley Scott was just like, no, we're going to replace Kevin Spacey in my film that's coming out next month, and lo and behold, he did it.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah.
They replaced Kevin Spacey with Christopher Plummer.
Yeah.
And he was nominated for a Golden Globe.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? For that role.
Yeah.
So that's
well, they were the first audience to see it. So, I mean, it's like part of it is just like, you know, part of it is like, oh, is the film really that good, or is part of it just they're sort of bragging that they got to see it before anybody else? But I mean, it's going out next week. Like, it's going to be in theaters where everyone can make that decision for themselves.
And what movie is that again?
It's called All the Money in the World. It's based on the true story of the kidnapping of one of the Getty grandchildren back in the 20th century.
And the backstory, Kevin Spacey had a supporting role.
Yeah, he played John Paul Getty.
So an important role.
And then when all when the scandal broke, Ridley Scott was just like, we can replace him, because he'd wanted Christopher Plummer for the part initially, but the scheduling didn't work. So,
you know, you're not doing well when they actually reshoot an entire movie.
Oh yeah,
and take you out of it.
It's a mess. I mean, I can't. it's a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
Like bring it all down, and let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can rebuild with.
All right, so we're going to start talking about individual movies. There's several people on the line. We're going to take a break. Hold on the line if you want to ask a question. We'll get to your call right when we come back, and then we'll just start going through some movies here. You brought some trailers, and we'll just start talking about some of the movies. Take a break. Be back right after this.